That's such a good point. And
So,
go ahead, Dia.
well, I'm gonna tell you, so talking about weird stories of the Bible, New Testament, a lot of that's the Hellenization, but the Old Testament, you got weird stories there too, and they take on a different complexity. You know, you could see it as being old world and new world. These stories, you know, some of the wilder stories, because before today I was looking up some wild stories, you know, and some of the crazier ones are in the New Testament, I would say.
Yeah, what we see, I think, in a lot of the Old Testament is this euhemerization. So what we're seeing is that the Jewish people are reacting to all of the mythologies and the religions of the people around them, okay? And all of the different cults that are all clear influence on the Israeli people, you know, and they're responding to it, they're transforming it, they're either incorporating it. So they're taking these clear figures who are gods in other traditions and turning them into heroes of their tradition. You know, like look at something like Samson. Samson is Heracles. You know,
Right,
like
exactly. It's no doubt.
Melkart, like it's so blatant. It's almost on the nose, right? And Neil, you've done this so many times. Like you could probably run a list of these kind of figures in the Bible.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. When you look, I did a video about the Sanchoniathon theogony that they supposedly found in a temple, and Philo Biblos translated into Greek. Whatever the truth is about that, when you look at this text, it lines up with the Old Testament Torah Genesis story, but like instead of El, you have Saturn, Kronos, but like you still have the same sort of same stories are there. It's just instead of having characters and people that are prophets or patriarchs, they're just gods. So there's something going on there.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up that kind of Saturn-Kronos connection, because this brings me to another conspiracy that Dion kind of turned me on to. And that's this idea that what is going on in the Bible and that what occurred originally is sort of this familial battle story that we see across these various different mythologies, okay? So in the Kronos story, right, you have Kronos slays his father and takes the scepter, becomes the king, ushers in peace, creates this golden age. But eventually they become a tyrant, you know, and they foresee the future where their children are going to overthrow them. So what do? They go out, they're going to swallow and consume all of their children. But Rhea prevents this. She protects Zeus, right? She sends her off to go stay with the goat Almathea, right? And then Zeus kind of comes of age. He drinks that magic goat milk, and then he goes and he kills, right, Kronos, and he takes the scepter and he becomes the new king, and then he takes Rhea as his wife, right? And so that is kind of this primordial story. Now imagine you have a similar thing going on with El and Asherah and then Yahweh, right?
Wow.
So El and Asherah are the Elohim. They're the pair at the beginning, right? But eventually El becomes corrupted and Yahweh has to destroy them. But he decides he doesn't want to stay with his mother in this version. He wants to eradicate his mother and his father. Just take it all for himself.
Wow, that's interesting. There's a couple questions that I think are interesting. Samantha, thank you for the super chat. Jesus and Krishna or Buddha? I'm guessing it's comparing both of them to Jesus. What do you guys think?
There's also a lot
to say about that.
There are so many conspiracies that go deep with this. You see this a lot within the East, and a lot of people who are influenced by Eastern ideas. It's this belief that, you know, that the Bible and the Jesus story and like a lot of these Indian stories are actually connected. So you'll see things like, you know, where people draw these parallels to where Jesus is actually Krishna. He's an incarnation of Vishnu. And they'll look for parallels in these books like the Sri Bhagavatam or, you know, the Mahabharata and all this stuff. And you get a ton of this. You also have things like the Manichaeans that come in who incorporate a lot of Eastern religious ideas. Like they see the Buddha as a divine being in his own right, as a prophet, right? And we don't know a ton about them, so there's all of this conspiracy, but there's clearly a lot more connection with the East than people are talking about, right? Like St. Thomas goes to India, right? You know, there's a very early connection there, and a lot of these people on the Eastern side are interpreting these Christian ideas through their own lens, you know?
Yeah.
Well, and you know, if I could say, there's people that make pilgrimages to this day to Kashmir, to where they consider Jesus' tomb. That you know, a lot of traditions where he doesn't die on the cross, or it's Judas that dies on the cross, or he's resurrected, or what have you. And he goes to India, and they got a tomb there where to this day people make pilgrimages.
Oh yeah, and famously, there's these stories of when the first Portuguese missionaries started to arrive in India, they found Christian monastics. They looked more like sadhus, but they were Christian monastics, and they were preaching the Gospel of Thomas.
Look at
so
the
there was a Christian
Manichaeans.
tradition already there.
Look at the Manichaeans. They have Jesus, Buddha,
Mani.
Jesus, Buddha, and Mani are the three main prophets. This is a religion that's going all the way to China.
Yeah,
You can find Manichaeans in China and India. So the Jesus being influenced by people in the East is one thing. But also, on the flip side of that, you can go to India and you can find Buddhist statues there that predate Christianity. There were Buddhists in Alexandria, Egypt, and there's another way we know that is by looking at the text of the Mauryan king Ashoka the Great, where he decrees, he erects these pillars all over the world that say Antiochus, Ptolemy. These are Seleucid and Ptolemaic kings way before Christianity, and he's telling these kings, make sure you send the doctors. Make sure when I send people out to your lands, you provide them with doctors and healthcare. So you have 200 years before Jesus, you have Buddhist, or I should say Vedic, because there's like they're very blended at this time period.
Well, it's
You have
really
Vedic people talking about healthcare, universal healthcare.
Ahsoka
is a very interesting figure, and he's very much, while he is coming out of that Vedic tradition, he establishes himself as a Buddhist. Okay, and he does this as a form of, India has this really interesting feature of extreme religious acceptance, and a lot of it comes out of this period of the Ashokan and the Mauryan successive dynasties, and then later often with the Muslim dynasties. You know, there is this integration, and there's an allowance for a lot of variation. What's really cool about Ashoka is that he's a Buddhist and he erects Buddhist statues, he talks a lot, but he has philosophers and he promotes ideas from tons of different faiths. And, you know, like Jainism thrives at this time, and so does Hinduism, and so do a lot of like reaction, other ideas like you wouldn't, anyway, really interesting.
Right.
You know, what I was going to say is that Ahsoka, we were talking about it in a husbandry episode we did last week, and we mentioned a little bit, he's one of the first persons that set up veterinarian hospitals, you know, due to his relationship with animals.
He was obsessed with healthcare for some reason.
Oh, yeah, but he wanted to help animals too. He was like, he's like, hey, we got to take care of them. And another thing, we have an episode coming up that we're going to talk about that deals with the Buddhist relationship with Egypt, Meroitic Egypt.